All right. Good evening, everyone. Thank you for joining the Illinois Environmental Council for a Clean Energy Town Hall. My name is Samira Hanessian, IEC's Energy Policy Director, and I'm thrilled to be your host tonight. As folks join the line, I'd like to cover a few housekeeping items. By way of introductions, I'd love to know who's on the line. Please feel free to add your name, pronouns, and organization to the chat. We are recording this town hall, which will be posted on IEC's YouTube page. If you're uncomfortable being on camera, this is your chance to turn yours off. All attendees will be muted by default, so please use the chat function to ask questions, add comments, or provide resources. We will take live questions at the end of the session. And finally, this goes without saying, please keep tonight's conversation civil and cordial. This is an educational event to learn more about the clean energy legislative work that IEC is planning for 2025. Any profanity, personal attacks, or disruptive behavior will not be tolerated. Please don't make me remove you from the Zoom line. So before we dive into presentations, I would like to run through IEC's mission slide. So since 1975, the Illinois Environmental Council has worked to safeguard Illinois, its people, plants and animals, and the natural systems, which all life depends by building power for people in the environment. We continue this great work every day. And with that, I will get us started. So in terms of the agenda here, we do have a keynote, Leader Robin Gable, as well as we will hear presentations from Christina Anicelli from Sierra Club on the Clean and Reliable Grid Act. That will be followed by a presentation on the Solar Bill of Rights by Michelle Knox and John Albers. And we will move on to a presentation on the Clean and Healthy Buildings Act by Madeline Simonson. And then we will close out around, we're talking about the Mahomet Aquifer, carbon capture and sequestration regulations that will be presented by Andrew Rain. We will open up the line for a Q&A towards the end, as I mentioned. So with that, let's get started. So the focus of tonight's town hall will be on how we as environmentalists can support the equitable clean energy transition in Illinois. I have the privilege of introducing our keynote speaker, Representative Robin Gable, who is the majority leader of the House. Leader Gable has been an environmental champion throughout her tenure, and over the last 4 years, she scored 100% on IEC's legislative scorecards and has a lifetime score of over 99%. Tonight's keynote will set the stage for us. So without further ado, I'll pass the mic to Leader Gable.
Thank you. Did you unmute me? Yes.
You are muted.
Okay, great. Well, good evening, everyone. It is great to see you. I always enjoy talking to IEC with you folks. So the framework that I just want to lay out for you is kind of what we're looking at in our energy working group that we're going to be starting in a couple of weeks. As you know, we're a little behind in our CEJA goals. But one of the main problems that we have now is a flat electricity, is that over the years we had flat electricity demand, and recent growth from data centers and new manufacturing facilities, electrification, and other sectors is really causing Illinois to see significant increases in power demand. So with new renewable energy development and new transmission development that can address these new peaks, they have been delayed. So what we are really looking at is how can we really increase our electricity that's on the grid, because we have a greater demand. We're going to have 4 meetings over the next period of time to really look at this, and I will tell you kind of what our issues are. The first one is going to be a meeting of just the legislators and with the ICC and IPA. And it's really to look at what is our target? How much megawatts of power will we be short? In what year and at what time of year? So that will kind of set the stage for what we need to do as we look at the issues in the other three meetings. The next one being renewable energy is taking much longer to come online compared to original projections. How can we speed up renewable energy deployment so it is online by the time we need it? And then the third meeting, we will discuss transmission development. It's also taking much longer than expected and is uncertain at this point. What projects are needed and how do we speed up those projects? And then the fourth area is, since renewable energy and transmission developments will still take time, what can we do on a much faster timeline to address peak electricity use? So topics include energy storage, peak load reduction strategies, energy efficiency, and other flexibility resources. So it's narrow in a way. I don't think it includes all of the issues that I saw you're going to talk about tonight, but we feel that this is a good start to the year. So I appreciate all the work that you're going to do and that you have done, and I look forward to working with you all this next year.
Thank you, Leader Gable. Okay, next we're going to hear from Christine Nanicelli, Illinois campaign representative for the Beyond Coal campaign at the Sierra Club, Illinois. Christine is responsible for guiding the strategic direction of Sierra Club's Beyond Coal work in Illinois and making sure we transition away from coal into clean energy. She works with staff and volunteer leaders to craft effective campaign plans and help coordinate the many capacities that are implementing those plans. Christine was deeply involved with the development and passage of Illinois' 2021 Climate and Equitable Jobs Act, or CEJA. And to quote Rep. Anna Mueller, Christine continues to bring policy expertise, negotiating prowess, and community-centered emotional intelligence to the table. That's why in 2024, Christine received IEC's Karen May Green Caucus Advocacy Award. With that, I will pass the line over to Christine.
Thanks, Samira. Appreciate it. Good to see everyone. Thanks for joining tonight. Thank you, Leader Gable, for joining us and for all of your incredible leadership over the years. As we navigate some of these challenging moments to our climate work, I am reassured, given that you're one of the legislative leaders at the helm guiding us. And we still do, as you noted, have a lot of work to do. So thanks for setting that stage. And I'm going to dig in a bit more to one of our primary bills that we're looking to pass next year, as quickly as possible, the Clean and Reliable Grid Act, which is really some of our next key policy wins to maintain the progress that we've made coming out of CEJA, the Climate and Equitable Jobs Act. So let me see if I can, yep. So as I think most folks know, IEC, Sierra Club, Illinois, and many of you all are part of the Illinois Clean Jobs Coalition. We have a broader sweeping platform across three key sectors of work, our most climate polluting sectors of our economy, and one of those is the power sector. And so we are working towards a trajectory here to get us to 100% clean, renewable energy by 2050 and a fossil-free power grid by 2035. And we've made some progress, of course, since the passage of CEJA. And I know many folks were instrumental in the passage of that bill. It's worth noting that bill has really been a precedent-setting piece of legislation that other states look to as a model, that the Inflation Reduction Act at the federal level also pulled elements from. And so when Illinois takes action on energy and climate, the rest of the nation watches us. And so every single move that we make has profound implications beyond just our state's borders. So, I mean, a couple of highlights. Every time we've passed a piece of legislation, Future Energy Jobs Act in 2016, CEJA in 2021, we're making significant growth. I think since the passage of CEJA, we've seen significant growth, in particular in the solar industry. And in particular in some of the smaller scale sort of distributed solar energy programs. Since we passed that bill, the Power Agency has issued contracts for over 5,000 megawatts of clean energy. If you think sort of comparatively during this period of time, we've seen around that same amount of megawatts of coal come offline in central and southern Illinois from the Vistra and Dynegy fleet. So we're making some progress, but as you can see in the bigger picture of electric generation, because Illinois does continue to be an energy exporter, we still have a ways to go, and important work to do to build out that part of the pie graph. And notably, we don't have much battery storage deployed in our energy portfolio. So I want to talk a little bit about what some of the key challenges are that we need to solve for and the key policies to do so in the Clean and Reliable Grid Act. First, just as Leader Gable noted, energy demand for the first time is growing. We had seen previously flat load growth and even declining in many instances because of our great energy efficiency policies. That game is over, and we've got a new trajectory now for a few different reasons. One, we're seeing significant growth from large new load customers, AI data centers, large manufacturing facilities, and of course, growing demand from electrifying our other sectors. Remember, our power sector is really the foundation of all of our critical climate work in Illinois. So we need to be able and ready to take on demand from not just those new customers, but also some of the great work happening to electrify buildings and transportations. So this means while we do have great energy efficiency standards, we've got to maximize them and we've got to accelerate clean energy. And you'll note here on the slide, took a quick snapshot at some of the great energy savings from our energy efficiency policies over the years. We've got commercial customers doing a great job. We've got residential customers doing a great job. Existing large industrial users, nada. We've got to get every single energy player in the game for us to hit our climate goals, for Illinois to continue to be a clean energy leader. And we need to solve that issue. I want to note, we sit in a bigger regional, in between two different regional energy markets. And without getting too far down a wonky rabbit hole, I think what's important to note is there's an important part of maintaining reliability 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, with our regional transmission organizations, these regional energy markets. And we pay for a portion of our utility bill to help pay to make sure those commitments to generators are provided across the region. When power is at peak, maybe it's a winter storm, maybe it's a heat wave coming through in the summer. Capacity markets have increasingly tightened in recent years, and we're seeing price implications because of that. It's important to know what those key forces are that are causing this. There has been poor planning in large part on behalf of these energy markets. We have got to improve our transmission infrastructure to help unlock huge amounts of clean energy that are sitting and waiting in these interconnection queues that are ready to meet the demands that we have for our state. We have got to upgrade the power grid to do so. And this has been a significant challenge for us, but there are certain things that we can do at the state level to address some of these challenges. And in the meantime, it's critical that we don't fall back and scale back our climate commitments, because in these instances of peak demand, the resources that really have underperformed have actually been fossil fuels, coal plants and gas plants that are particularly expensive. They've proven, especially in the last few winter storms, to be unreliable. Whereas we've seen renewable energy, especially wind power, be some of the most critical resources during those moments when the grid is challenged to its max. So this is a critical reminder that we have to accelerate the clean energy push. It is not a time to scale back our climate commitments and fall back on unreliable and dirty sources of energy. Another challenge, Leader Gabel mentioned this as well. We are not hitting our clean energy targets. We've got to do so. And, you know, we've been playing catch up for several years now because of years of low growth as we were looking to fix some of these policies at the state level before we passed CEJA. But there's still some challenges to our larger utility scale energy procurements that have to be fixed. We can't miss any of these targets. We have to meet them and exceed them in order for us to really position Illinois as a climate leader. And lastly, an important reminder, we still have an Illinois Public Power Challenge. We have over 1 million Illinois residents that receive their electricity, not from ComEd, not from Ameren, not from an alternative electric retail supplier, but from publicly owned municipal utilities and electric cooperatives that should be for the people, by the people, but that's really not what has happened. These sources, these generation portfolios from our munis and co-ops make up the lion's share of not just our climate pollution in the power sector, but our most dangerous air pollution like sulfur dioxide. And it still ranks us nationally because of that pollution input footprint. We need to have basic energy planning, a basic responsibility that all utilities should be doing and should be doing out in the open and transparently with their customers to assess what is the most cost-effective resource portfolio to meet customers' demands, to make sure that they are meeting their climate commitments under CEJA. And these entities are not doing that and potentially losing out on huge, extraordinary opportunities under the Inflation Reduction Act with clean energy incentives that are now finally available from munis and electric cooperatives. We've got to fix this, and we've got to position these folks as solid energy planners and clean energy leaders. So how do we address these challenges? We've got to pass the Clean and Reliable Grid Act, which is tailored to meet some of these critical challenges that we're facing. First and foremost, we've got to strengthen and update our energy efficiency standards. We've designed those several years ago. They're in need of updates. They can be strengthened, they can be improved. We know that we can be capturing more because the cheapest energy is the energy that we don't use. So that is a critical and top priority that we know will have important implications and benefits, not just to the power grid, but to consumers as well on their utility bills. We've got to lower specifically peak demand, and there's ways that we can do that with unique rate design improvements through time of use rates, looking to find ways for customers who can and are able to shift some of their load to off-peak hours. We've already done this pilot, a pilot in the ComEd with ComEd, and we've seen great benefits, not just to load, but also to utility bills. 3, we need to make sure all consumers can access a clean energy future, and requiring munis and co-ops to do transparent energy planning. It's basic. It's time to get this right. We need to develop an energy modeling bureau where we actually are building energy policy that's well grounded in modeling data. Most other states do this on every couple of years. They do modeling, they do energy planning, they have a public utility commission. We get our state legislature together every couple of years. We've got to improve this process of how we do energy planning. And this is an important way we can do that. And it can inform the way the Illinois Power Agency procures more clean energy. Not just with the renewable portfolio standard alone, but there's other procurements that we can think about really maximizing clean energy investments in. And lastly, we need to lower barriers to constructing transmission lines. We have an outdated power grid, and that's not going to work. We need to build a 21st century clean energy grid with a 21st century power grid. And so some of the other key policies that we have not proposed, but are we feel like are critical components to a final package. Battery storage policy. Battery storage is a critical resource that we have not built out enough of, and this is a critical way that we can maximize the value of solar and wind on our power grid as we begin to shift away more and more from fossil fuels. So we've seen other legislative proposals. We've got a great set of policy principles guiding us, but we know that this is a key piece of a final package that we know needs to be a key piece. We also need to address the renewable portfolio standard issue with utility scale procurements. Again, not something we've proposed, but we know that this is a critical issue that does need to be addressed, and look forward to working on that policy fix. And lastly, offshore wind, a pilot project that has already been legislatively proposed, the Rust Belt to Greenbelt Act. We have to build a lot of clean energy. And one of the greatest resources we have is Lake Michigan. And during those winter storms, when gas plants did not show up in the way that we needed to over the last couple of years, the resource that does particularly well in those time periods, wind and offshore wind. So this is a unique solution to fix and certainly comes with extraordinary economic and workforce opportunities for the southeast side of Chicago. So with that, I will conclude and welcome questions at the end on this topic. But thanks, everyone. Let's get this done.
Thanks so much, Christine. All right. Next up we have we're covering the Solar Bill of Rights. So Michelle Knox is a certified site assessor for solar PV and solar thermal. She's trained through the Midwest Renewable Energy Association and has completed over 375 solar projects, plus LED lighting and wind and solar heating upgrades. She has secured grants from USDA's REAP and Illinois Clean Energy Community Foundation to support educational solar projects in Illinois. And with a background in development and teaching, Michelle brings her skills to advance solar initiatives, including board service with the Illinois Solar Energy Association and contributions to local solar policies like net metering. Immediately following Michelle and complementing the same presentation, we'll have John Albers, who oversees Advanced Energy United's regulatory engagement in the central region of the United States, with a focus on advancing and defending renewable energy and energy efficiency policies at public utility commissions. Prior to joining United, John oversaw SunPower's policy and strategy efforts in the Midwest. He developed his policy and regulatory experience as an administrative law judge in the Illinois Commerce Commission and as an attorney in private practice assisting local and national organizations and businesses to achieve the regulatory goals. So with that, we'll pass the mic to Michelle and John.
Thank you, Samira. I'm happy to be here tonight, and we're going to be talking about the Solar Bill of Rights, HB 5315. Next slide, please. So what we're trying to do here is restoring transparency, energy democracy, clean energy access to Illinois municipal utilities, munis, and electric cooperatives, co-ops. A little bit of background with CEJA. Christine already kind of did an introduction about that, but munis and cooperatives are not required to meet the clean energy targets set in Illinois state law. These entities are disproportionately tied to fossil fuel power, and Illinois ratepayers are currently in the dark about what decisions these entities will make for their energy future and whether they will seize the clean energy opportunities of the Inflation Reduction Act. Although the right to self-generate language that was included in CEJA in an effort to expand rights to Illinoisans living in the muni and co-op territories was added, additional legislation is needed to address issues that were initially identified as what we called hot topics. Next slide, please. So some real life examples of why the legislation is needed. In these territories, some require $1 million liability insurance policies. This is an extra cost that those that live in the investor-owned utilities don't have to do. Net metering policies were changed in some territories shortly after customers energized, when they had purchased their systems based on a 25-year estimated financial analysis. And then within year 1, 2, or 3, the policy changes that fell short of them being able to recognize that. Piggybacking off of that are the no legacy or grandfathering when policies were changed initially. Intervention with boards, which I actually was involved in several, where we went with community members and we went to the boards and addressed asking for a legacy period, and were able to get, in some cases, 3 to 5 years when counterparts in the IOUs offer 30+ years. System size limits of 10 kW, which is a very small system, generally residential. In some cooperative territories, limits on only allowing interconnection in 1 meter when multiple utility meters may be present at commercial sites. Crediting the amount that's fed back for the excess solar generation at somewhere 3.2 to 3.5 cents, when neighbors that use that generation that comes back on the line and pull it down are paying the retail rate, which is generally around 12 cents. Excessive fees for engineering studies on residential and small commercial systems. In some cases, 10 kW systems and above can be subject to a $1,500 engineering study to determine if there's going to need to be infrastructure upgrades. That is, again, another barrier to being able to go solar. No leases or power purchase agreements. Third-party financing structures. One of the great things that CEJA did was it has a program called Illinois Solar for All. And as part of that program, developers need to carry the expense of the project for a period of time. And the only way to do that is through leases or power purchase agreements, and disallowment of that has basically not allowed these opportunities that benefit low-income participants to be able to participate in the clean energy economy in these public utilities. And the final one, can you move up just a little bit? There we go. Oh, I don't know why it's doing that, but I know what it is. No recourse without expensive legal action in the event that a customer is not able to resolve their dispute with their city council in the case of a muni, or with their cooperative board in the case of the cooperatives. So that's been a problem because that can get expensive, having to hire legal counsel. Next slide, please. So the Illinois Environmental Council drafted and introduced the Solar Bill of Rights. Oops. The Solar Bill of Rights this spring, based on the hot topics and some of the issues that I identified in House Bill 5315. Representative Daniel Dedich is the bill sponsor in the House. Now let's learn more about utility structures and the Solar Bill of Rights from John Albers from Advanced Energy United. John?
All right. Thank you, Michelle. Samira, if you could pull up the United slides, which I suspect you're doing anyway. Just real briefly, start us off, I just wanted to provide a little breakdown. You can go to the next slide. Of the three types of utilities that we see in Illinois, we got the public utilities, or IOUs, as they're sometimes called, the investor-owned utilities, municipal utilities, and electric cooperatives. The two things I want to draw to your attention here on this slide is that the municipal utilities and electric cooperatives are owned by the municipal residents or the cooperative, members. In other words, they're owned by their customers. In both instances, though, we also see very limited opportunities for recourse to the people that lead the utilities, the municipal utilities and electric cooperatives. So that's the point behind showing you this slide. Next slide, please. To address some of the problems that Michelle identified, we've got House Bill 5315. At a really high level, one of the first things it does is that it amends the county's code and the municipal code to prohibit counties and municipalities from banning solar and low voltage solar powered devices. What we mean by the latter is just simple things like solar powered doorbells or other small devices you'd have attached to your home. That came up because apparently there are some areas where those have been prohibited. And Representative Didich actually brought that to our attention. So we're looking to try to amend the act to, prohibit that kind of behavior. The second, high level piece here is that it amends the Homeowners Energy Policy Statement Act to prohibit HOAs, homeowners associations, from banning the same, low voltage solar powered devices. The HEPSA, for short, already prohibits HOAs from banning solar. So we would just be expanding the HEPSA a little bit to cover those low voltage devices. The biggest part of 5315 are amendments to the Public Utilities Act. These amendments would provide guardrails on the ability of electric cooperatives and municipal utility systems to regulate solar. And the underlying effort here is to try to align the rights of customers of munis and co-ops with the rights of public utility customers. And on the next slide, we'll have a deeper dive or a closer look into some of those changes. One of the first things we've suggested or proposed is a more transparent calculation in the value that customers receive for the exported energy. In other words, if you're not home on a sunny day, you're not using anything in your home, that energy goes back on the grid. How much do you get paid for that? Customers of, Ameren and ComEd, for instance, right now get full retail value. And as Michelle pointed out, you get a fraction of that from munis and co-ops. So we're proposing a more transparent way based on the price to compare that the ICC currently posts on its website. Customers would also be able to lease a solar energy system on their home or buy power from a solar energy system on their home. That latter is also known as a power purchase agreement. Physically, the systems are exactly the same whether you buy it outright or whether you lease it or engage in a PPA. But a lot of munis and co-ops won't let you lease or engage in a PPA. And there is no engineering or policy reason to prohibit that. The third, gets at that $1 million liability example that Michelle gave us. It would prohibit onerous insurance requirements and instead just basically require the installer to make sure they're insured for any mistakes they make. The next one is the customer can operate their system for 25 years without any adverse changes to the terms. This would be the legacy provisions we're hoping to install or instill, rather. Got to be careful with my choice of words here. The interconnection application fee would be capped at $500. That would cover everything from the act of filing the application, but also any kind of study the utility would do. Because as Michelle said, sometimes they'll charge you $1,500 just to do a study for what is essentially a very small residential system that, if you're properly managing your distribution system, you shouldn't really need to change much about the system to accommodate these small residential solar facilities. The next one is a facility upgrade cap of $500. So again, if the utility decides that it needs to install a new transformer, to accommodate your small residential system, they're capped at charging you for $500 for that. Because in our mind, if they are properly maintaining their system, they should be planning for load growth or, just growth generally, whether it come from behind the meter or on their end, and cap that charge at $500 so that there isn't a notion of the customer wanting to do solar subsidizing, what the utility should be doing on its own. Applications rather would have to be processed in 15 business days, whereas we see in some instances customers waiting much longer than that for simply thumbs up or thumbs down on their application. And significantly, last but not least, dispute resolution by the ICC. The Illinois Commerce Commission already has systems in place for customer complaints regarding public utilities. That can be mediation, arbitration, informal complaints, formal complaints. What we're proposing is that the customers of munis and co-ops have availability or opportunity to avail themselves of the same dispute resolution practices. The munis and co-ops strongly oppose this measure. We believe it's in the public interest to allow someone to take a look at what the munis and co-ops are doing without requiring the customer to engage in expensive and lengthy litigation. Having been an ALJ at the commission and been engaged in trial court proceedings, I can tell you the ICC process would be much easier and less expensive for the average person to navigate. And with that, I will turn it over to Samira and answer any questions later at the end. Thank you.
Thanks, John. Thanks, Michelle. I am now going to turn over the mic to Madeline. Madeline Simoneson from the Natural Resources Defense Council is a dedicated advocate for equitable building decarbonization and works on public initiatives at the state, local, and at the PUC levels. She strives to promote affordability, practicality, and climate justice with Illinois' gas transition and building electrification discourse. Madeline focuses her work on EJ communities and has a passion for prioritizing equity throughout our work to transition Illinois off methane gas. Madeline is a key asset to the Illinois Clean Jobs Coalition's work to engage with the Illinois Commerce Commission and legislature as we work to ultimately pass the Clean and Healthy Buildings Act. And with that, I will pass the mic over to Madeline.
Thanks, Mara. Good evening, everyone. Once again, Madeline Simoneson with she, her pronouns. And today I have the pleasure of talking about the Clean and Healthy Buildings Act policy briefing. And I'm just going to set the stage first. Let me just move this over a little. I just want to talk about the problem. So burning methane gas in our homes have 4 main problems that the Clean and Healthy Buildings Act is trying to address. The first one being climate. Simply put, to meet our climate goals, to meet the objectives of the Paris Climate Agreement, we must cut emissions from the building sector. In the state of Illinois, that number is around 20% of Illinois' emissions come from the residential building sector. And in a very built out place like Chicago, that number is closer to 69%. So a really crucial piece of the decarbonization puzzle. Another issue we're trying to tackle is costs and consumer protections. So Illinois gas utilities, especially the investor-owned gas utilities, have some of the highest fixed charges in the Midwest. And what that means is there are 2 main components of your gas bill. One being the fixed charge, which just upkeeps the gas system, and one being the volumetric rate, which is actually coincides with your actual gas usage. So you really have little control over the fixed charge. And, we would argue that because of gold plating the system and increased expansion of the system, we have some of the highest fixed charges in the Midwest, which then leads into us leading the nation in some years in utility gas shutoffs. So not a really terrible situation is happening and also exacerbating energy burdens across the state of Illinois. Another issue we're trying to address is burning methane gas in our homes is detrimental to our health. Recent studies have suggested that 20% of current childhood asthma cases in the state of Illinois can be attributable to gas stove usage. And people even compare it to, for instance, having a smoker in the home. So there's negative health impacts. And I, will just quickly say, we now know that the gas utilities went on a marketing campaign similar to the tobacco companies and really trying to message themselves as the cleaner energy. So quote unquote, natural gas, that was a messaging tool. This is really methane gas in our homes being burnt. Another problem we're trying to really solve for is a unmanaged transition. People are probably hearing through, the Inflation Reduction Act, electric, appliances being more efficient and better for our health. People are moving to heating their homes and cooking with electricity in their homes. And the concern is if large scale customers such as universities, large corporations, or more affluent people start making this switch, fewer and fewer people will be able to socialize the cost of maintaining the gas systems, that fixed charge element of the gas system. And so in the past, when there was growth, as we built another mile of pipe, more people would, pay for that pipe over years, and, shareholders would collect, a rate of return on that infrastructure. With the fewer people on the system, bills are going to increase. And so this is a great graphic from the Building Decarbonization Coalition and groundwork data that was released this year that particularly looks at our 4 investor-owned utilities in the state of Illinois. And they're just saying keeping capital expenditures at the same average we see, so about 6% of growth each year, and with moderate customer decline, so just 50% of the population moving over to electric heating options by 2050, we're starting to see gas bills double somewhere in the 2030s. So really concerning and something we want to make sure this is a managed transition. So Black and brown and low income folks aren't stuck paying for the bag of this dirty gas system. So we're trying to solve for a lot, but we have solutions, and the solutions are contained in the Clean and Healthy Buildings Act. And so just for time, I'm just going to hit the main pillars of the Clean and Healthy Buildings Act, but you can find my contact information, and there'll also be a Q&A at the end. But some of the main pillars, one being the Clean Heat Standard. This is a standard that will require gas utilities that are regulated at the ICC to meet 100% emissions reductions by 2050, with a ramp up period every year, ramping up 4% starting in 2030 to hit zero emissions by 2050. And they could meet these emission reductions through obtaining clean heat credits. And so clean heat credits could be, through their energy efficiency portfolio, installing more air sealing, switching out appliances from gas to electric. It could be installing rooftop solar. It's really up to the utility's choice, but they have to purchase or install these clean heat credits to meet this emission reduction goal by 2050. And to make sure that this is done equitably, there is a required increase emissions reductions, and equity investment eligible communities, so disadvantaged communities, will receive additional attention and additional emission reductions each year. And there will be a pathway study held at the commission to talk about different pathways forward on how to meet these decarbonization goals. So the legislation just sets the standard and has some parameters on what is considered a clean heat credit, but then a lot of the discussion will happen through a pathway study analysis at the ICC. Just quickly here, a lot of just going back to utility transparency, there is some utility transparency language in the bill around gas system spending. We have seen gas systems increase their spending in the last decade through fixed rates across the state of Illinois. So really investigating, did that money actually go to the pipes that most needed it, the pipes that were the most volatile, maybe could have an explosion, there was a safety risk, or did the pipes potentially go to gold plating and making unnecessary investments so the shareholders could collect a bigger rate of return? And also just seeing, have gas utilities thought about this customer decline question? Have they thought about how, gas system spending might look significantly different for us to meet our goals under CEJA? We've already highlighted energy efficiency in the first bill, but there's also some gas energy efficiency standards in the Clean and Healthy Buildings Act as well. So this would increase utility spending on energy efficiency 2 to 4 times more, depending on the utility. And particularly the energy efficiency measures that they can count towards their savings would not count if they were to install a more efficient furnace, like potentially they are doing now, but it has to be made with upgrades to the actual building envelope, to the outside of the home. These are better measures that won't cause health issues and won't lock people into a gas system that might look different in the next couple of decades. So really important to increase those energy efficiency standards. To address some of the equity issues that we are seeing with this gas transition work, we wanted to set up a state navigator program, a one-stop shop space where people could go in the state to figure out, who can install a cold climate heat pump? What are my financing options? I'm hearing that the Inflation Reduction Act rebate dollars are coming out. How do I access those? How do I prepare myself to access those? How do I pair this with rooftop solar? How do I connect with Solar for All? How do I basically make my home clean and healthy? This is a one-stop shop in the state set up to help people make this transition easier, with 40% of the funding to the actual navigator going to directly installing some of these measures in folks' home. And then just to close up really quickly, there's also some shutoff protections. So if you are trying to seek energy assistance, bill assistance, you will not be shut off for a period of time while you're trying to help pay your utility bills. I can just quickly move to some of the slides. There's a lot more that's included in this bill. What I covered are the main highlights. We are going to do something similar to what's happening in Chicago with the new construction ordinance, that we would update our building codes so we not add new gas hookups and new buildings, and we also wouldn't socialize that cost with subsidies. Like I said, there's a lot in this bill. We're trying to solve for a lot. It's a really exciting time, but I'll stop there and we can answer any questions at the end. Thank you.
Thanks, Madeline. That's great. Okay. Next, to close us out on terms of speakers, we'll pass the mic to Andrew Rain from the Prairie Rivers Network. Andrew provides technical and policy expertise in support of Prairie Rivers Network's energy and coal pollution programs. The challenges facing Illinois watersheds are complex, and finding answers for those problems require the science and engineering experience that Andrew brings to PRN. Andrew joined PRN in 2015. He is passionate about water resources, energy policy, and coalition building, and is instrumental to furthering the state's progress to meet its clean energy goals. The Middle Fork is his favorite river to paddle. With that, I will pass the mic to Andrew.
Thanks, Samira. Can you hear me and can you see my slides?
Yes and yes.
Awesome. Great. Well, I'm here today to talk about protecting the Mahomet Aquifer. So Mahomet Aquifer, for those of you who aren't familiar with it, is the drinking water source for much of central Illinois. So I live here in Champaign County, and I live in Urbana. Champaign-Urbana is probably a town you've heard of, but all the way out to Peoria is the scope of the Mahomet Aquifer. It's the drinking water source for almost 1 million, and it's designated as a sole source aquifer. And what that means is if we lose the aquifer, there is no reasonable economic alternative to the Mahomet. And we have that designation because of the good work of a lot of folks in this community and in communities nearby who stood up and fought for their aquifer. So there was a landfill called the Clinton landfill that was going to come by in the town of Clinton, and the grassroots organized and they pushed back on that landfill. Ultimately, they got a consent decree from the landfill to not store. It's not that the landfill's already there, but they were proposing to store PCB waste, so they're not going to store that waste. And they also fought and got the sole source designation back in 2015. So this coalition that fought and protected the aquifer needs to come back and fight a new threat, which is carbon sequestration. So you've probably heard a lot about carbon sequestration in the last probably year or so, or 2 years or 3 years, depending on how long you've been following it. But I'm just going to talk today about how it threatens our Mahomet Aquifer and other aquifers. Carbon sequestration is usually associated with capturing carbon. That carbon is then injected deep underground into a saline aquifer. Usually in this area, they're looking at the Mount Simon Sandstone, which is like a mile underground. For context, the Mahomet is about 500 feet underground. A number of different failure pathways could then release that CO2 and reintroduce it where it could reach up into the Mahomet. That could be failures at the injection well, failures in the containment structure, the underground geological structure, a caprock failure, for example, or abandoned wells that could provide a pathway. And the risks of CO2 getting into a drinking water source include acidification, salinization, and importantly, that change in water chemistry can result in the release of chemicals that are currently in the aquifer but stable and not dissolved into the water. Suddenly you lower the pH and your water chemistry changes. So we might have pollutants showing up in our aquifer that weren't there before because the chemistry wasn't such that they would dissolve. So why is it happening here in central Illinois? This is an image from a research paper showing sort of the sweet spot of where it is most economically effective to inject CO2 and store it in the Mount Simon Sandstone aquifer. I've put the shadow of the Mahomet aquifer over that. And unfortunately, you can see that the Mahomet aquifer lines right up with that sweet spot. And so they're looking here because it's the cheapest place to store it. And why is it happening now? Because the Inflation Reduction Act created an $85 a ton incentive, a tax incentive for injection of CO2. And there are 3 proposed projects that are currently proposed that would store CO2 under the Mahomet aquifer. You can see those here. That's the Vervain and Compass projects located in McLean and Logan and County, and as well as the One Earth project in Ford County. Together, these would store over 55 times more than any project that has stored CO2 in Illinois. So ADM has been doing this for a decade. They've stored, I think, 4 million metric tons in that time. They're proposing to do 55 times more just under the Mahomet, just what they're proposing right now. So the scale of what we're looking at is really, really unprecedented. This is new. There's no comparison to what is coming our way, and it is our sole source aquifer. Leaks happen. So the methane gas leak. So methane is an interesting comparison to CO2 because it rises when methane is often stored underground, and then it rises up when you when it leaks, or when you want it back out, you just open your well and it comes back up. There was a leak, and that contaminated a section of the Mahomet where people living in Fisher were drinking water. And critically, ADM, that pilot project I mentioned, which is meant to be the shining example of CCS, has leaked twice. They didn't tell us during negotiations. And they've known about it for a while. We didn't find out about it until the US EPA started investigating, and then a reporter broke it. And those leaks have released CO2, and they're probably not going to get that CO2 back. I'm wondering if they're going to get the tax credit still. That's an open question, though. But leaks happen. This is a real threat. This isn't just unbelievably, it could really happen. And again, we're talking about larger scales than we ever have before. So SB 1289 passed in May. This is a bill that puts protections in place on the whole carbon capture sequestration process. That's capture, transportation, and storage. Those protections are good on storage. We like those protections. They're important. That bill leaves a critical gap that leaves the Mahomet vulnerable. It says, if you contaminate somebody's water, you have to provide an alternate drinking water source. So it contemplates contamination. And it says, well, you just have to be accountable and provide that alternate source. Well, the US EPA has determined that the Mahomet aquifer is the sole source for central Illinois. There is no alternative. This is our drinking water source. And so we think that this bill, while it is good, has left a gap that the Mahomet is uniquely threatened by. These are just some numbers about the amount of the volume. I'll skip them over because I've kind of covered it already. So we're calling for a ban. We think that we should ban carbon sequestration both through and under sole source aquifers in Illinois. And there's two bills. Senator Faraci introduced SB 3968. Representative Ammons introduced HB 5874. And both these bills would very simply say you cannot inject through or store under sole source aquifers. And so we're spreading the word. We're calling on people to step up to protect the Mahomet Aquifer. We want that ban to be passed at a state level. We're also calling on counties. There's 14 counties that sit over the aquifer. If they all ban it, we're done, but it'd be easier just to have the state do it. We're reactivating those cities that stood up for the aquifer back when we got the designation. They're called the Mahomet Aquifer Advocacy Alliance. We're getting them to stand up again and start fighting for the aquifer. And then if those projects that I mentioned earlier do go through, there's some EPA hearings, and we're looking for people to show up to those. So we've got a whole range of solutions and threats, and we're really looking for folks to support. Go to protectthemahomet.com for more information. Thank you.
Thanks, Andrew. All right. So we still have all of our speakers on the line. I know we're coming up on the hour here, but happy to keep the line open for questions. We've been responding to some questions in the chat here. But if folks have additional questions that haven't been addressed yet, please raise your hand. Happy to call on you. Any questions from the audience?
Yeah, this is Art Spooner. I put a question into the chat about HB 4747.
Got it. You read that one.
Aha. Thanks for flagging this, Art. Yeah, great flag. I'll bring it into the power sector working group tomorrow to discuss this, and no question, like better and more transparent. More transparency in MISO and PJM is great, and just deepening the state's advocacy in those spaces are absolutely critical, no question.
Thank you.
Yep, Jeff.
Hi. I also put a question into the chat, but I can read it. I understand that the payback for energy sent to the grid from residential solar panels will change on January 1st. Why is that changing, and how will the compensation be changed?
Samira, you want me to try to answer that?
Go for it, John.
Okay. When CEJA was negotiated, one of the provisions in there was that the net metering would change on January 1st, 2025. And basically right now, if you sign up and get solar and get a project, energized and approved and all that, before then, you can get full retail net metering locked in for the life of the system. And by full retail net metering, I mean you get the distribution credit, the energy credit, and the transmission credit, all credited back to you for every kilowatt hour that you put on the grid. They pay you the same thing that you pay them for the kilowatt hours you take. Under the language of the statute, that changes on January 1 so that you lose the distribution component. You'll still get a credit for the energy and the transmission, but you'll lose the distribution component. And that was part of the legislation and the package that was approved back in 2021.
And just a quick follow-up question. The bill, as it exists now, exempts shared roof buildings. I understand that there's an amendment to change that in the works, but what's the status of that, and why was that shared roof exemption put in?
I can't tell you why it was originally. Right now, it is only in the Homeowners Energy Policy Supply Act. There is nothing that governs the treatment of solar by counties and municipalities, and we're trying to change that. The language we're looking at right now would include or get rid of the exemption for shared roofs. So we're hoping we can allow people with a shared roof to put solar on their part of the roof if this legislation passes. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, it does. I mean, there's no prohibition on putting solar panels on shared roof. It's just the HOAs can erect more obstacles than
Right.
otherwise.
Right. It's just one more way for them to tell you no.
Yeah. I'm working on that. I have a shared roof.
We're working on it too.
All right. I am inclined to call it at that. If there are any other pressing questions that folks have. Hold on one second. There we go. If there are any questions that folks have, please feel free to reach out and email me. Happy to connect you with any of our presenters. But thank you so much for joining IEC's Clean Energy Town Hall for this year. I look forward to continuing to work on our priorities for the next legislative session. So enjoy the rest of your evening.
Bye all.